One of them kind of days.
As soon as we get off.
Listen, welcome. This is Trauma Tuesdays. We are laughing and excited about being able to come and just have more conversation around how we heal. If you're on Facebook, if you've got questions, we really want to engage you in this conversation. So please send your questions, put your questions up. We've got some folks standing by to read them to us to keep us engaged, but looking forward to this conversation tonight. I want to introduce myself again, and then I'll have Dr. Hayman do the same. But again, I'm Dr. Ron Bell, senior pastor at Camphor. I've been doing consulting and coaching around trauma, grief, and just really kind of trying to connect our community in ways that we can heal, especially right now, given this trial of Derek Chauvin. As I think about being a Black and brown bodies and just with the kinds of stressors and emotions and trauma that's being re-triggered because of this trial, and just because of COVID and because of life and because of politics and all those places and pieces, it's good to have a space where you can come and just sit for a second and get some tools around how to heal and how to be fully present in a way that's life-giving, even in the midst of the trauma. And so that is my mantra. That's my calling, I believe, is just to help give those tools, help find that place to be seated and to breathe, even in the midst. And so that's some of the stuff that we're going to be doing tonight. Dr. Hayman.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, good people. Hope and trust that you all are well. My name is Linwood Hayman. I am an associate professor of behavioral health science at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. My research focuses primarily on resilience after trauma, specifically resilience in African-American men, people in African-American bodies after the experience of trauma. What tools have they used? What tools can they use? What resources can they take advantage of? What resources have they taken advantage of to maintain resilience after trauma, or, as Dr. Ron has been talking, during trauma?
Powerful. That word resilience, powerful. And last week was our first conversation, and we talked about permission. And the phrase was that we were giving ourselves permission to be fully present in our trauma. Come on, look at Isaiah. He on it. Giving ourselves permission to be fully present in our trauma, and just how important it is to give ourselves that permission. We talked about the importance of breathing. We talked about the importance of making space, of becoming unenmeshed. So not being so close up and stuck on the trauma that we're unable to see our own abilities and our own authorities and our own weaponry around taking control in that moment, just how important it is to separate and to breathe. And so we dealt with that last week. And tonight we're going to be talking about ritual and the importance of creating and finding rituals that sustain us in the midst of our trauma. And so that's tonight's conversation, is around that piece. But I wanted to take just a minute before we get started to breathe, to do a centering exercise. I don't know about you, but this has been a long day. Dr. Hayman? It's been a long day for you?
Man, I just got out of class into another my students hanging in there, though. I hope they're hanging in there.
Yeah.
They online tonight, I hope.
They online tonight? Oh, good. This has been a long day. I think I've been on Zoom since 9 a.m. Literally, dropped the kids off 9:15. I'm on Zoom while dropping them off, doing a meeting. And I don't think I've gotten off at all. I've just been on all day long. And so I want to talk about this is just a centering tool, just to breathe, and then we'll go into the material for tonight. Let me say a word though about why this is important. We know our brains are broken up into three basic pieces. We've got our mammalian, which is our reptilian, that fight, flight, or freeze piece. Right at our base, we've got our limbic system, which is where our emotions sit. We have our neofrontal cortex where we analyze stuff and put stuff in boxes. And so we have these three basic compartments of our brain. When we experience trauma, there's often a disconnect, right? Between that fight, flight, and freeze versus our ability to rationally put things in spaces and boxes, right? There's a disassociation. And oftentimes what happens when we're in a traumatic episode are being triggered, we stop breathing. And so those neurons that usually would connect the mammalian to the limbic to different, those neurons that would usually be able to do the work that they're designed to do, we don't give them the necessary oxygen to do it because we stop breathing, right? And so when we stop and breathe, what we're doing is allowing our bodies, allowing our brains to do what it's designed to do, which is to heal us, right? When we stop breathing, we rob it of the ability to do what it's designed to do. So I wonder, even as we start, if we could just breathe for a second. And what I'm asking you to do is when you breathe in, count to 5. And when you breathe out, count to 7. And do that 3 times. Can we just stop, pause, and just do that for a second? When you breathe in, count to 5. When you breathe out, count to 7. Here we go. First breath. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Your brain thanks you. Thank you for that. You just gave oxygen to your body to do what it was called to do. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So tonight I want us to talk about ritual and the importance of ritual. The promise to create or find a ritual that sustains us in the midst of our trauma and why that's important. Even as we jump in, Dr. Hayman, what do you think about the importance of ritual?
It's referred to here as ritual, and I like to also think about it as practice. Right? It's very hard for me to say this, but as a former athlete, I like to think of myself as still being athletic, but I am not the athlete I once was. I'm gonna just say that right now. When we think about the importance of practice as an athlete, depending on our specific sport, we also know that, again, for example, for football or for basketball, there are specific plays that are run that are designed to help us be successful in whatever it is we're engaged in, right? The more we practice those plays, the more we practice, the more we turn those practices into rituals, the more respect that we have for the practice. When it comes to be game time, when it comes to be, time to fight, to take flight, or to freeze, we have already embodied the practice.
Yeah.
So the practice lives in our body, right?
Yeah.
And not in our mind. So once we give ourselves permission to take that deep breath, then the ritual that we have already embodied takes over. And it's like, oh, I know what to do.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful, because that embodiment is where we need to start. Yeah. Because just as we can embody healthy practices, so too do we embody trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when we Tiffany says rituals are grounding and can be therapeutic. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. When we experience trauma, right? What happens, right? So our brain is chilling. Brain is doing what it is designed to do. Our neurons are hanging out, they making connections, they going at light speed, all kinds of stuff, right? All of a sudden we experience trauma. right? Our neurons go on alert, right. They danger, right? And so our autonomic nervous system, sends our neurons into panic, sends our blood cells, to our extremities, right? It puts us in prep mode to receive whatever attack there is. And so when we experience trauma, we're in this danger mode, right? Right. All the energy, all the blood is rushed to our vessels, right, to our extremities, right. Where there's no longer a connection between our mammalian and our limbic, our neofrontal cortex. We're just ready to be reactive. We're just reacting, right. We're just in that place of reactivity, and that place of reactivity, that place of trauma, that place of threat, creates this toxic environment, right. And we get stuck there. We get stuck there, right? And so that gets embodied. That's in us. And so if we don't do anything to change that, to get that out of us, then we get stuck. Those stress hormones that were released, right, are still flowing around, right? That toxicity, that acidity that's in our body is still pushing us and going. And so if we don't do anything to stop that process, to heal or correct the trauma, to close that loop, then it continues to go forward, right? And so you wonder why, you feel bloated. You wonder why in communities of color there's a higher degree of hypertension. You wonder why we look at the COVID results and who's dying. It's mostly Black and brown folk, right? Right? You wonder why hypertension. You wonder why diabetes and kidney disease and all those kinds of things are mostly affect Black and brown bodies, and they do so because we're usually stuck in this hyper traumatic mode, right? Because we haven't put in place practices that help us deal with the embodied trauma that we're carrying. That's the reality and the need for these kinds of practices, these kinds of rituals. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that saying that we have in our house is practice makes. It's not perfect. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to be prepared. So the boys that now at 10 and 8, they know practice makes prepared.
Yeah.
Rituals are a more spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Rituals are intended to inspire a higher connection, right? As we practice our road to healing, as Dr. Bell points out.
Yeah. I think about the deer, right. Goals to be prepared. I love it. Yeah. I think about this deer, right? This impala. Right, and it's hard growing up on the Eastern Shore. You say Impala, all of a sudden a car picture. You don't even think about a deer. You think about an Impala, right? Right. Right. But I think about this Impala. I think about this deer that's just kind of hanging out in the field, right? Just kind of hanging out doing this thing. And I think about these lions that are tucked away in the background. And what happens to the Impala when the Impala senses the lion's presence, right? I think about chemically what happens to in the body as the impala freezes, right? And there's energy in that freeze. There's energy in that trauma, right? I think about what happens when I'm driving and a police officer pulls up behind me. Mm-hmm. Same sensation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Same sensation.
Yeah.
I think about. I used to live in this really horrible apartment in Hampton, Virginia. And the officers would always come the first of the month to do evictions. And you would hear them knock on the doors, down the hall. And you just would think, it must be me. Yeah. I think about that feeling of, being evicted. I think about that. I think about it's that same traumatic tension, it's that same piece. And it sits inside our bodies. It sits inside of us. And so if we don't find a process to deal with it, a ritual to deal with it, we get stuck in that trauma. We get stuck in that level of toxicity. Right? That becomes the power of ritual. Tiffany says the stigma of therapy and addressing mental health in the Black community hinders healing from trying to further propelling the cycle of trauma. That's right. That's right. And listen, Tiffany, that if we don't deal with that unhealed trauma begins to become culture. And then we think this is just who we are. We don't go to counseling. We don't do these things, right? And so rituals help us reconnect ourselves. Rituals help us get out of these traumatic freeze modes, right? Just as trauma is embodied, so back to your point, Dr. Hayman, so is our healing, right? And so I've got to find a way to shake myself loose. Mm-hmm. I got to find a way to shake off that trauma, to shake off that toxicity, to shake off that energy. I've got to find a place to put that pain and uncertainty, to put that frustration and anxiety, a place that's at a safe distance away so that I can begin to heal. Mm. That's not always an easy thing to do.
No, you can, and it's incredibly difficult when we don't give ourselves permission to acknowledge what's happening.
Yeah.
When it's not only the permission to acknowledge it, but when we don't even have that understanding that we have the power to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that we are experiencing this trauma, and then we can begin to make those decisions on what rituals we need to engage in to give ourselves that distance and that space from the trauma, as you mentioned.
Yeah. I was teaching a class the other day, and I was telling them that there is a way to successfully hit a brick wall. Mm. Right. And the way to successfully hit a brick wall is, once you hit it, is to say, "Oh shoot, I hit a brick wall," and stop. Right. I didn't use the word shoot.
Right. That's what I was saying. I know you're pastors.
You know. But what I told him is that the wrong way to hit a brick wall is to hit it and keep hitting it. Yeah. And to keep trying to push past it, and to keep trying to push your way through it, bloodied and messed up. Keep pushing and pushing, right? But that's what we do when we're stuck in this traumatic episode, and we don't find ways or practices or rituals to put ourselves at that safe distance so that we can begin to heal. We just keep going. Yeah. We think this is what it's supposed to be. Yeah. This is how I'm supposed to be reacting. This is what's supposed to happen.
It's a right?
It's a rites of passage. Yeah. And so that becomes the value of this work. Now I'm talking. We're talking about rituals and practices, but I want to be practical, right? And so I want to give some examples of exactly what I mean. Again, we're talking about just this embodied trauma, right? Again, the cop pulls up behind me. The lion comes out the field while the impalas are there, right? The officer is knocking on doors to give evictions, right? I don't know if we can go home tonight, or if we got to sleep in the car, or if the line for the shelter is too long. I'm afraid of being unmasked. I'm afraid of all these pieces create this tension, this toxicity, right? And it is embodied. And so there are different ways, hundreds of ways, that we can begin to create rituals and practices to help us deal with that. But one of them, for example, is to simply write, right? The art of writing, just writing. It don't have to make sense, but just the physical act of journaling, right, helps to move that trauma from here, right, outward, helps to get it out, right? The simple act of just writing. Right. There's this thing in our body called the vagus nerve, right? And when you sing or you hum, that triggers your vagus nerve. That connects to your limbic system, where your emotions sit. And so you think about grandmama and them. right? You think about church and how they would just sit and hum. They would, right? We didn't know what they were doing, but they were healing themselves. They were calming themselves down, right? But those are practices, right? Humming, singing, writing, using my body, right? Moving, right? Getting my nails done. Right, getting massages, those pieces, those rituals, those practices help to break that traumatic episode and begin to give me the space necessary to begin to heal, even in the midst of the trauma I'm experiencing.
Yeah. And the the challenge, as you say, I really want to reiterate, is in while you're embedded in the trauma, it's hard to realize that there are indeed things that we can do that can give us that space. So one of the when I teach classes about contemplative practices, right, or mindfulness exercises that we can do to break up some of the negative experience that we're engaged in, or the toxicity. Very simple tapping exercise. You make a little point with your hands like this.
Mm-hmm.
You just begin to tap all over your body.
Yeah.
So you tap your arm, tap your palm, and then once you're done tapping that specific section, brush it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
What it inspires is this feeling of excavation that you are engaged in. You are actively breaking up that stress from your body. You are actively breaking up that freeze, and then you are brushing that stuff off.
Yeah, I love it.
You say stuff, but brushing it off. It all a good laugh will also do that. A good laugh will also activate all of that stuff. And then after you're done having that hearty laugh, brush it off.
Yeah.
Brush it off.
Well, that laugh is also stimulating that vagus nerve. Laughing, humming, singing, moaning, right? Even talking at a low tone is stimulating that vagus nerve, which is triggering your limbic system to say, okay, you can relax now. Yeah, you're reconnecting yourself. I love that tapping piece. Can we tap other people? Because I got a whole list of people I want to just walk up to and just start.
I don't know if you should do that. I don't recommend that.
I'm gonna just walk up and just start
tapping people. Like, oh, hold on a second, Pastor. Wait a minute. Nah, I don't recommend tapping other people. You got to start at home first.
Yeah. I love that. And so these are practices. I think about Ebony said, don't try it over here. Oh, you wait till I'm done. Huh? Baby, what'd you say, sweetie? What'd you say? Right. I think about the importance of being able to put the trauma, or to place the trauma at a distance away from ourselves. That ability to become unenmeshed.
Yeah.
And how it is not to relieve or to reduce or to deny, but it is simply to give space to see fully.
Yeah.
So when I put rituals in practice, when I create rituals, when I create practices, it gives me the ability to change my distance from the thing that seems to be overwhelming, so that I can engage it differently.
Yeah.
Right? And how profound that is. I think about, man, so when my father died, my father was an ordained elder, United Methodist Church, and that was always his thing, right? Was becoming an elder, right? That was always his thing, right? And so when I became an ordained elder, because he'd already died, I was like, man, I don't want to do this. This ain't no joy in this thing, because he's already gone, right? Right. And so I remember his big thing was Cracker Barrel. Right, he loved Cracker Barrel. I hate Cracker Barrel. I don't know why. I think they should have like a medical facility like right beside Cracker Barrel. I think that I ate crab, right? And he would always get all the worst food. Like if it was fried, smothered, salted, that was the stuff he was gonna get, right? Right. So I remember, so we wanted to honor him even though he wasn't there, right? And find a place to put this sadness and this lament of his passing, right, so that I could fully experience the eldership and all that kind of stuff without the attachment of the grief of his loss, right? And so what I did was I went to Cracker Barrel and we ordered all the bad stuff he would eat, right? We just set it out on the table and we just picked at it, right. But it was a ritual. It was a way of moving the trauma and moving the grief and moving all of that out of here and into a place where I could give it space. That's the purpose of ritual. Yeah.
Student, one of my students. By the way, Tiffany Morris is one of those Sharp Morgan students that I'm talking about, as is Leah Oliver and LaQuisha Lett. She says, but also we tend to brush off our healing because we're scared of the outcome of healing or scared of what's to come after healing, from healing. And sometimes we do not want to go through the pain. The brokenness is where you find your healing from that trauma. The key is to keep going, to stay positive and find things that will help stimulate your mind.
Yeah.
Leah Oliver says placing trauma away from you allows you to gain closure and heal from the trauma.
Yeah. Powerful. Powerful. Roger Neal says one thing when I experienced trauma is when I fought in the Vietnam War, 365 days, not knowing I'm going to come home or not. I was left. How do you get rid of that trauma? I was in Vietnam from January 1967 to January 1968. Yeah, thank you, Roger, for that. I think one of the things, and I want to be clear, I don't know, Dr. Hayman, that you ever really get rid. Right. I wrote this book a few years ago called "Is There Space for Me?" Embracing grief through art. And I used in the book this image of an elephant. And I talked about how sometimes my grief felt like the trunk of the elephant, right? Just laid all up on me, sloppy and, heavy and weighed me down. Sometimes my grief felt like the ear of the elephant just hanging over me, but I could see, but I knew it was on me. Sometimes my grief felt like the belly of the elephant, right? I couldn't even get my arms around it. It just encompassed me. But there were moments when my grief felt like the tail of the elephant, where I could simply just fold it up, put it in my pocket, and carry it. Right? And it wasn't always that continuous. It wasn't like it went from the belly to the trunk to the ear to the tail and I was good. There are days when my grief still feels like the belly. There are days today when my grief feels like the trunk, when it feels like the ear. But there are also moments when it's a tail I can just wrap up, put in my pocket and keep moving. And there are more days when it's the tail than not. But I think what we learn to do is we learn how to carry the trauma. Yeah. We learn how to embrace the grief in such a way that it does not become all consuming, but instead we learn how to live with it. Yeah. Right. I think Roger, I think those images, I think those things that you saw, that you felt, that you smelled, that you heard in Vietnam in 1967, I think that you will have pieces of that throughout your journey. I think the skills are learning where to put them, learning to create space in between you and them, learning to have that distance so that there can be healing even in the midst of the carrying. Right. Again, I think it was Lena Horne who said it's not the weight that breaks you down, it's how you carry it. Right. And so learning how to carry it, learning how to be at peace, or to at least to be present with that trauma versus being overwhelmed with it, I think becomes part of the journey.
And even when we think about Brother Roger, what you just mentioned, the fact that you have the insight to the literally the insight to understand the significance of this trauma, it also it also gives you the opportunity to seek the help that you need
Yeah.
from that trauma. Right? There are times, there are traumatic experiences that we have that are too big for us individually to only breathe through.
Yeah.
There are some traumatic experiences that we have that are too big for us to only engage in our rituals through. There are some traumatic experiences that require us to seek professional help.
Yeah.
Speaking
Yeah.
speaking personally, there have been some traumatic experiences that I have had, right, that have required me, even with my mindfulness practice, even with my meditation, even with the close relationship that I maintain with God, there are still elements of the traumatic experiences that I've had that require me to seek professional help. Because without that professional help and that professional insight, or that professional communication as to specific things that we can do, even taking medication in some instances, if that's the most effective practice, right? Prescription medication. But one of the things that was also mentioned, Brother Devin, see that Brother Devin mentioned, there are times where we have trauma parties, right?
Mm.
Or we love to trauma bond, and it limits our growth.
Yeah.
So what we're calling into action here is the ritual of social support,
Mm.
making sure that the support you have from your family, from your friends, from your colleagues is effective and efficient in helping you to locate that trauma, which would then give you the ability to place it, right, outside of you.
Yeah.
So being able to ask for help, whether it be from a professional or whether it be from your social support system, is paramount. The only way you're going to be able to do that is by locating the trauma. Trauma doesn't go away, but you can practice to make it oof, to make it.
100%. 100%, Tiffany. That's good. That's good. That's good. That's what these rituals do. Amber says, I think accepting what has been happened and realizing it's a state of mind you don't want to remain, then you're able to manage it better. Right. Right. So next week we're going to be talking about circles. The last week we're going to be talking about stories. Amber, I want you to bring back up that statement you just made when we get to stories, because we're going to be talking about taking authority over who gets to narrate your trauma. Right, we're gonna deal with that the last Tuesday of this month. Who gets to narrate your trauma? But and I love during trauma. I feel like it's best to validate how you feel, because you have a right to feel how you do. Then set a direction away from it. I love that. I love that. I love that. Roger says one thing I learned how to deal with the trauma was that if I was not spiritually grounded in God, forgive me, I don't know where I would have been today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so just that relationship with God, Roger, helped to give you that grounding. That's your ritual. Those are your practices. Those are the things that give us that distance. But I want to speak to something Amber just said around just these thoughts in your head. Right, 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 right. Because part of Dr. Hayman, what I think we have to do is begin to take authority over what we let stay in our head.
Mm.
Not to dismiss it as it didn't happen, but I think we need some tools around taking authority over what we get permission to stay in our head.
Yeah.
Right. So I got this thing I call 10 fingers. 10 fingers. If you're watching on Facebook, put up your hands, 10 fingers, 10 fingers, 10 fingers. Do like this, 10 fingers. All right, so I got 10 words, 10 words. Here we go. First word. Every thought in your head does or doesn't, I don't know, what does, we'll say that, does not belong to you.
Mm.
Every thought in your head does not belong to you. 10 words, 10 fingers. 10 words, 10 fingers. Right? And so when I'm feeling that trauma, when I'm feeling that stress, right, one of my rituals, one of my practices is just to do this. Look. If you ever see me doing this, that's me. I'm telling myself internally, all these thoughts don't belong to me.
Yeah.
I don't have to take authority over that. I don't have to let that thought stay in my head. I don't have to have that thought define my next 6 hours, define my next 2 weeks. No. Every thought does not belong to me. Right. That's a ritual, a practice that helps me deal with the trauma I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Leah says, I believe that if you let things stay in your head, it can make someone lose awareness of life around you, and it makes you feel that you are reliving the trauma. Absolutely, Leah. All right, Ace.
Yeah.
Look, Ace, you done wrote a paragraph now. Come on. I'm gonna read part of it, Ace. Trauma is not something that ever dissipates or is eliminated from us. Yeah, it changes our perspective and a way of thinking. However, there's such a blessing in it as one can empathize and understand others' pains more easily. And it's not to say it is necessarily a problem that trauma does change who we are as people. Yeah. And I love, Ace, how you use that word dissipate, right? Right? It changes form. It's no longer ice. It's no longer water. Now it's just steam. It's just steam, and I can deal with it differently. But there are moments where it might become ice again.
Mm-hmm.
There are moments where it might become water again, right? And so learning these techniques of rituals and practices helps me to be able to engage the trauma and engage the stuff I'm carrying, right, in such a way that I'm able to begin to heal even in the midst of the trauma, right? Those 10 fingers, right? Every thought does not belong to me. Right? I don't have to simply let it stay simply because it's in my head.
Yeah.
Right. Cindy says a wrong thought may knock at the door of my brain, but I don't need to invite that thought to come inside and sit in the front in the front of my fire. Cindy, you better say that. You better say that. You better say that, Cindy.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Taking authority over what's in my head, right? Understanding that creating rituals and practices helps us be able to manage the stuff that's happening. Right. Again, we're not trying to dismantle or get because there is some stuff you can't get rid of.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about present traumatic stress. Right. That we are Black and brown bodies in this society today at this moment.
Mm.
Right. I don't care how many times you spin around and speak in tongues and shout. You're gonna be a Black and brown body in a minute. Right. So I think finding tools and resources, finding rituals that help us to engage and deal with the current trauma we're carrying helps us to be able to create that space so that we can heal even in the midst of the trauma.
Yeah. Dr. Ron, can I tell the folks about Pinky?
Oh, please do.
So when we were students at Morgan, Dr. Ron and I were roommates. And one morning he wakes up and he tells me about this dream that he had of a really big built Ving Rhames looking bald headed black dude in a pink suit. And Pinky, as we come to affectionately refer to him, came in, just barged in to the apartment, just barged into where Dr. Ron was. Dr. Ron said, "You need to leave." Pinky was like, "I'm not going anywhere." So Dr. Ron walked back farther in efforts to, again, give himself some space. And Pinky gave chase, following, right? So eventually, Dr. Ron in his dream turns around and says, "You have to leave." And Pinky just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until his head cracked the ceiling, and out of that ceiling came, all of these horrific and terrible things, like cockroaches and snakes and mice and all of this terrible stuff. And he woke up and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "One thing, I don't know, but what it sounds like to me is that these weren't the words that I was using at the time, right? I didn't know trauma. But what it sounded like was that there were some very difficult and challenging experiences that you were having at that time. And they were manifesting in your brain, in your mind, as Ving Rhames in a pink suit, right?
Yeah.
And the way that you were aggressively trying to shout at this trauma, you need to leave that type of attention, that type of ritual, that type of practice that you were engaged in was not conducive to putting to putting Pinky in his place. He was feeding off of that energy that you were given. I'm not trying to deal with you. I'm trying to get rid of you. You need to leave.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, trauma doesn't go away. So it was saying, "Oh, you're going to keep giving me energy. I'm just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger." So now we have to come up with new rituals and new practices to engage. Take the trauma's power away. Pinky, you can stay, but I'm not going to give you power.
Yeah. I love that. Can I simplify that?
Please.
Whatever you feed grows. Whatever you feed grows. When you feed the trauma, when you give attention to the Pinky, give attention to the trauma, it grows. When you decide to give attention to yourself and to your own healing, when you decide to situate yourself in the front, when you do that, then you're taking that power away from the trauma. You're taking that power away from the anxiety, the pain, the frustration, and it cannot grow. Whatever you feed grows. That's what these practices and rituals help us do. They help us prioritize ourselves and our healing over the trauma itself. Tiffany says, how much time would you say is reasonable to set aside daily for an effective ritual? Tiffany, I say whatever you need. I say you'll know when it's effective when you start seeing it work. Right. So I don't want to say 2 minutes or 20 or 50. I want to say whatever you try it till it becomes effective. And when it's effective, you mark time. And that's how much time you give it.
I love that, because it practice is something that has to be engaged in order to know how to work it, in order to know if it's working. So Tiffany, if you recall, I start every one of our classes with a 2-minute timeout. And in that 2 minutes, I'm not teaching, I'm not talking. All you have to do, or all I invite you to do during that 2 minutes, is to just sit still and to just be wherever you are in whatever you're in, right? That 2 minutes that I am low-key trying to habitualize for you all, if I'm giving 2 minutes of my valuable class time to you all, right, to get yourself together, to arrive at this space, to be able to engage in class, right, then I want to encourage you to give yourself permission to give yourself at least 2 minutes when we're not in class, right? Give yourself at least 2 minutes. Experience how it feels. 2 minutes will no longer suffice, like Dr. Ron says, and it'll grow to 5 minutes, and it'll grow to 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And you will get to a point when your practice will suffice. But until you begin that practice, until you initiate, you won't know, because it's contextually based to you. I can't prescribe it. Dr. Ron can't prescribe it. Anybody that prescribes it, you need to be wary.
Yeah. Look, Talia says those 2 minutes are so peaceful. I love that. Roger says, great job, my brothers, talking about our traumas. I think it also helps. I know how it helps me. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think about Dr. Hayman. My wife dragged me to the cell phone store a couple months ago and made me get a new cell phone. Right. And so I think I had an iPhone 4. I don't know. I had the same one since college. I don't know. It worked, right? But it had gotten to the point where every 15 minutes I had to put it on a charger because it just wouldn't hold a charge. And then by earlier this year, it had gotten to the point where I had to keep it on the charger and I had to hold the charger in there. Right. And so I got this new iPhone the other week. And you know, it holds the charge all day. Right. I don't have to bother with it. It just, you know, I don't even look for a charger now until it's time to go to bed. Right. But I think about that old cell phone. And I'm telling you, I had it since college. Right. So I think about that and think about having to charge it every 15 minutes. Think about having to hold the charger in there, having to do all this work just to keep it charged, and how different it is now with this new phone. Right. Those are two different phones. Right. And they require two different levels of energy. What the mistake would be to try to treat the old phone like the new phone. The mistake would be to base my healing and my practices off somebody else. The mistake would be to think I'm going to do it the way they do it, right? I've got to find what works for me and my phone, regardless of whether it's a 4 or a 12 or a 7 or a 1. I got to figure out what's keeping me charged, how to stay charged, right? And so that's only something we can do as we go. And so I think it was Tiffany who asked that question, but I encourage you to figure out what helps you hold your charge. It might be different depending on who you are. Amber says, what mentally makes the difference of trauma? Something that has happened to you different from person to person. Exactly.
No, she's asking, like, what makes the difference? So how do we know when it becomes a trauma?
Oh, great question.
It's a fantastic question.
Great question. So the difference between trauma and stress, right? Stress is an action that happens that is inside of my ability to handle. That's stress. So getting my boys up in the morning and making sure they get to the school by 9:15 is stressful. They got to get washed up. They got to have, now with the COVID, they got to have a mask on, right? And they keep forgetting their mask, and the mask be dirty. So I got to find clean masks, right? They got to have the socks that match and all kinds, right? So that's stressful, right? It is in my ability to handle, right? Trauma is the opposite. Trauma is actions that happen that are outside of my ability to handle or deal with internally, right? So trauma and stress are two different things. Getting my kids to school is stressful. It's not traumatic. Watching Derek Chauvin keep his knee on George Floyd's neck until he died, 8 minutes and 47 seconds, that is traumatic. And watching that video over and over and over again is traumatic, right? That's outside of my ability to handle, to conceptualize, to internalize. I can't do nothing with that. That hearing that man call for his mama sticks in my head. I can't do nothing with that. That is traumatic. That's not stressful. That is traumatic, right? So thank you for that question. Those are two totally different things, stress and trauma.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to add to that is you can kind of tell what's traumatic by the residue that it leaves, right? There's a trail that trauma leaves, right? There's a signature that stress has, as Dr. Ron mentioned, that's different from trauma. So a traumatic event is one that causes deep distress.
Yeah.
And it leaves us feeling helpless, frightened, overwhelmed, or unsafe, right? So it happens to us. And like Dr. Ron mentioned, we don't have the resources to alleviate that deep distress. And that's what leaves us feeling helpless and hopeless and overwhelmed and frightened when we don't feel like we have, like Dr. Ron said, an ability to get rid of it.
Yeah. 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 Last born baby is asking about ways in which we deal with that trauma, right? Whether it's crying or some folk laugh. I've seen people, we've had folk who just, there are all kinds of ways in which we deal with the trauma, and it's different for each person.
Yeah.
Again, when the more work we do around understanding ourselves, right? Understanding our triggers, understanding how we handle and manage that elephant, those pieces will help us to create practices and rituals that will keep us healthy even in the midst of our trauma. But it's an ongoing work.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing work. Yeah. Leah says, being that many people endure trauma at an early age, how should you approach, address trauma, and introduce rituals in children? Leah, we do this all the time at home, man. We do gratefulness exercises. We do breathing exercises with our kids. Specifically with my younger son, David, we'll have him put his hand over his heart so he can feel how fast his heart is beating. Right. And we'll tell him, once your heartbeat slows down, then we'll have a conversation. And so he'll sit there with his hand over his heart, waiting for it to slow down. Right. So that he can engage us in conversation. I think there are all kinds of ways. I'm sure, Dr. Hayman, you have a bunch of practices with your boys, all kinds of ways to engage in practice with children. You have some examples.
Yeah, one example is not entirely different from the examples that you offer, but at night, my youngest son, Lucas, had been exhibiting fears of the dark. And so in order to help him alleviate that fear of the dark, what we would do is, when they would get in their beds, my boys share a room, I would lay in the floor in the middle of them and we would hum. I would hum, Mateo would hum, and he would hum. And what would stick with him is that sound. And that's something that he can do even when we're not there. Right? Even when I'm not laying in the floor, and even when Mateo is already asleep, if he wakes up and he feels this fear, the same way that humming distanced that fear when the three of us were humming together, that's always with him.
Yeah.
Right. And he can recall the moment when it was the three of us, and he can understand, oh, I got that power too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. Man, that's powerful. That's a ritual he will have for the rest of his life. Man, that's powerful. That's powerful. This is what we're doing. We're figuring out ways to manage ourselves even in the midst of our traumas. Gareen says, how do we deal with trauma? Who do we deal with traumas passed on?
I'm guessing is, how do we deal with trauma that's passed on to us by our family and friends?
Oh, easy. There you go, Doreen. There you go. Easy. Every thought in your head does not belong to you. That's it. Your family comes through, tries to drop that vicarious trauma on you. Just look at them and go.
Yeah.
Right. Your friends come through, try to drop that heavy trauma on you. Just go. Right. That's how we deal with that. We take authority over what gets to stay in our head. Listen, I thank God for you all. I love this conversation. Again, next week we're going to be talking about circles. So the 4 promises are. I see you, Isaiah. 4 promises, right? 4 promises are: number 1, we promise to give ourselves permission to be present in our trauma. That's promise number 1. Second promise is we promise to create or find rituals that help sustain myself in the midst of my trauma. That's promise number 2. Third promise is I promise to create circles or find circles that give me health and space to be freely who I am in the midst of my trauma. The last promise is I promise to retell the story of my trauma in a way that gives me victory even in the midst of the trauma. So we got 2 more weeks of these conversations. Next week will be around those circles and how we find circles and create circles. And we're going to talk about just our history as black and brown people and what it means to be African and how the community plays into healing when it comes to the individual. So we'll deal with that next week. And then we'll end this conversation, the end of the month, looking at retelling our story. Who gets to tell your trauma story? Who narrates that story? Is it your trauma? Is it or is it the victorious you? So we'll look at that at the end of the month. Stephanie says, would you recommend that someone investigate trauma that happened that has missing pieces? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would recommend, Stephanie, that they would do that work with a therapist. I would recommend they would do that work with a therapist. But we do what's called a trauma history graph. And so we go back to your earliest known piece of trauma, maybe 3 or 4 others, and walk up to today's trauma. And then we go through each one of those pieces and talk about what do you want to keep? What do you want to throw away? What did you learn? And we use that to build some tools and resources to help you manage ongoing or present trauma. So I would recommend that person would do that work with a therapist or someone who is skilled in that kind of stuff. Dr. Hayman, any closing thoughts or questions?
Just incredibly grateful to everyone for showing up. Really, really appreciate everybody's comments and everybody's suggestions and everybody's questions. I know that we weren't able to get to everybody's tonight, but we really invite you all to come back. And if you have the opportunity to ask the question again next week, we will do our best to get to it. I wish everybody well. I wish everybody peace and good health. And I look forward to sharing space with you all again next week.
Sounds good. Same here. Love y'all, man. Excited to see you next Tuesday. Do all this work again. Call your friends, call your uncles, call some folk who are dealing with trauma. Tell them to show up. 2 Black brothers, doctorate degrees, Morgan State University graduates in the house. I would love to have conversation about it. So listen, we'll see you next Tuesday, 7 p.m. To continue the conversation. God bless you. Thanks again.
Y'all be well.